This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 best-selling author, Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
We thought we were going to kill Che Guevara on 20th of November, 1965. We were there with the boats. We were poised, having a pretty good idea where they were going to try to escape from. This is crazy. Right at that time, one of the T-28 pilots crashed in the water. We diverted to go to try to see if there's anything we could do for this guy. And that had to be at the point Che made us escape, because we just can't see how it could have happened any other way. Because we had the lake locked up by Che's own admission. We had the lake locked up, and that's when he got away.
Thank you for doing this all the way across the world.
Yes, indeed. I'm in Brazzaville, Republic of Congo.
I have so many questions for you. This is such an honor for me to be able to do this.
Hey, it's always great to talk to a young SEAL.
Well, I don't feel that young anymore, especially when I see the guys today. Like, they look like just children. It's crazy. I feel like I'm the same, but I obviously am not.
Well, especially somebody who's doing so much for the brand, which you most definitely are.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And this book, oh my gosh, this is incredible. All the things that you did. And I wish that I had talked to you before I wrote my latest book. It's called Cry Havoc. And it's, so the protagonist of my first 7 books is a SEAL, but it's contemporary. And his dad, who he visits kind of in flashbacks throughout the series, he is a Vietnam era SEAL who then goes over to the CIA, very much like you did. So I wish I had talked to you about all of this before I wrote the book. I'm finishing up edits right now, but in reading this, oh my gosh, I mean, what a story. So I don't even know where to begin, but I think I'm going to read just part of the flap of the book here to set the tone, and then talk about your road to the Congo. But from the book here, and this is Cold War Navy SEAL, just incredible. Everyone needs to add this to their library. And it says, sometime in 1965, James Hawes landed in the Congo with cash stuffed in his socks, morphine in his bag, and a basic understanding of his mission: recruit a mercenary navy and suppress the Soviet and Chinese-backed rebels engaged in guerrilla movements against a pro-Western government. According to the U.S. government, he did not and could not exist. He knew he was on his own. He did not know that Che Guevara was attempting to export his revolution a few miles away. I mean, amazing. But let's talk to your road to the Congo. First off, Bud's Class 29, which was then called UDTR.
Yes, that's correct. Underwater Demolition Team Replacement. That's what the UDTR stood for.
Interesting. Yeah. So what are your memories of that? And you were in the Navy first. You would watch, it's interesting because you watched The Frogmen, that black and white film with Richard Widmark, and that's the one that I saw first too.
Everybody did it. Yeah,
amazing. So you were aware of Frogmen, UDT? Were you aware of SEALs when you went in, because it was within a year essentially of them being commissioned as SEAL teams?
Yeah, we saw them in the chow hall, and nobody was making a big deal of it, because they were just the same guys who went over and took off UDT and put on SEAL Team 2.
Okay.
So, and there weren't many. There were only 10 officers and 50 enlisted. So there weren't many.
And you had an interesting, it stood out to me because I know friends who have done similar things. There was an eye test that didn't quite go your way that you managed to finagle and work your way into the SEAL teams. Tell me about the eye test and the military not keeping up with technology, because back then it was contacts, and then when I came in, it was LASIK. But tell me about your experience getting into the SEAL teams, getting into BUDS.
Just to get into a Navy and be an unrestricted line officer, I had to get a waiver because I had 2200 vision, but it could be correctable to 2020, which I was. And I bought contact lenses with my first paycheck at OCS. When I graduated from OCS, I got board ship. Ship went, made an immediate, I went to some really good schools. I went to I was going to be the damage control officer on the ship. So I went to Atomic Biological Chemical Warfare Defense School. And then I went to Navy Firefighting School, which is the best school I've ever been to. I mean, it was terrific. And then I went aboard ship, made a trip to Westpac. And when we were in Yokosuka, I decided I was going to start the caper. So I went in during the noon hour. There was a corpsman striker on duty. And I said, Corpsman, let me finish up my physical here. Let me take the eye test. Oh, aye, sir. So, boom, 2015. It goes on the record. There's no questions, no nothing. How'd you read the chart? I read it that way. So I get an immediate set of orders to training. As soon as we got back to Oakland, I got an immediate set of orders to detach. And in my file, of course, as an officer, I carried my own medical records, and in my file was the waiver. It says I'm 2200. That was kind of a defining moment because I could easily have torn it out. But as you well know, it's one thing to play it right up to the edge, but you just can't go over the edge. It was just couldn't do that. So I thought, well, okay, I'll play this out and see if God wants me to be a frogman. So I detached to spend Christmas with my folks on the way to Little Creek and reported in the Little Creek on the 2nd of January. Went into the instructor's hut, presented my medical jacket. They had a first-class diving corpsman on duty. He started going through my medical records, and as he went through it, he speeded up and he flipped the pages, and being the last page, it stuck to the previous page, and he never saw the waiver. So I'm in. And I had my contact lenses the whole time. Nobody knew, no problems. And halfway through the training, we'd done Camp Pickett. Camp Pickett was, our land warfare training period. And it had been quite something because we had guys, we'll talk about this later, got the third-degree frostbite. We got big blizzard came up, and we got lost. Instructors couldn't find ourselves. The officers couldn't find us. Anyway, so we get back, and 6 of us reported in for muster on Monday morning. Everybody else was getting some degree of frostbite treatment. And I get called into the instructor's hut, and one instructor says, "Mr. Hawes, how many fingers am I holding out?" And I thought, whoa, this is not good. So he said, "They want to see you back there in officer's country." So I go back and I come to attention in front of the guy whose job I'm eventually going to have. And he says, "All right, Hawes, what'd you do?" So I told him the whole story, exactly the truth. And he's shaking his head, and he think, "Well, do you think you realize you might be eligible for a court martial?" I said, "Well, I don't think so, sir. I didn't say anything, and I didn't write anything." And he said, "Well, I don't know what's going to happen. You got to go over to the ophthalmologist right now at the hospital and get a thorough examination." So I go to the ophthalmologist, and I walked in, the ophthalmologist says, "Well, you're a medical phenomenon. You've gone from 2200 to 2015 in less than a year. The Bureau of Medicine is very interested in you." Well, I said, "Well, Doc, that's not exactly the way it happened." So he gives me an examination. He said, "Well, you're 2200. I said, I don't know what I can do." And I said, "Well, Doc, you got to do something. You just got to do something." And he said, "Okay, I'll say you're extremely well adapted for contact lenses." And he said, "Okay, say it. So I go out of there and I go back to the training unit. And of course, the instructors are busting my butt because I'm missing evolutions. And then I get a call from the senior medical officer of the Atlantic Fleet. And so I go over to see him and come to attention. He just looks at me. He just stares at me. And, this is it. This is the last resort. And he just looks at me. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. So from the tip of my toenails, with all the intensity that had built up, I said, Admiral, I'm standing first in my class right now. Don't tell me I'm not physically qualified. And he just looked at me and finally said, okay, I'll recommend a waiver. So I got a waiver. I don't know if that had ever been done before. And I got a waiver, so I thought, whoopee. But then it wasn't exactly whoopee, because in those days, the frogmen were the orphans of the Navy, as you well know from Ben's book. And so the training was conducted by the Naval Amphibious School, not the teams, which meant Black Shoe Navy. So I get called to the four striper, who's the head of the Naval Amphibious School. And he says, Hawes, I got a recommendation for a waiver here that I can approve I can forward either approve or disapprove. How would you like to come back as an instructor? I said, oh, Captain, I'd love that after I've operated for a couple of years. He said, I don't think you understood me, Ensign. How would you like to come back? I can forward this either approved or disapproved. How would you like to come back as an instructor? I said, Captain, I'd love it. So boom, in goes the recommendation, back comes, I get to complete training. And then of course, jump school, you don't have to be able to see to jump out of an airplane. So we went to Fort Benning, did jump school. And I get to underwater swim school, and there's a diving medical officer there, and he isn't going to let me start training. Well, the XO of the school was Dave Scheibel, who was a Mustang of considerable note back in the old days. So I go to him and I said, Sarah, this guy wants to can me, and I'm not trying to hurt myself. I took my dive test. I went down the chamber 200 feet, no problem, whatever. He said, Jim, stop worrying about it. We'll recommend a waiver. By the time they act on it, you'll finish the program. So did that. In fact, they came right back and said, we've already acted on this. So I graduate and I go immediately over to the training unit. The guys have been busting my butt for 6 months, and now I'm the boss. They treated me like I was a 20-year veteran Congressional Medal of Honor winner. They were so professional. The best year I ever spent in my life was that year. Anyway, so first thing I did was to go over to, again, remember, separate chain of command. You got the Naval Amphibious School, and then you got the operating teams. So the first thing I did was go over to the team, Skipper 21, and say, look, you need operators. I want to operate. Give me a waiver. He said, sure, I can do that. So he puts through a request for a waiver. I come back, immediate set orders. Attach report to UDT 21. Phone rings. It's Captain Lee at the Naval Amphibious School. Always get your ass over here right now. So I go over, snap to attention. Always report is instructed, sir. He said, you frogs are always pulling this crap. I'm going to get these orders canceled right now. So he picks up the phone. He's a 4-striper, and Skipper 21's a 2.5 striper. He gets the orders canceled, but the waiver was on the books. So a year later, almost 2 classes I'm instructed, I get a call from the XO of SEAL Team 2, Tom Hornbox, who was, I don't know if you know that name, but
I do know the name.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. And he was the CEO of SEAL Team 2 eventually, et cetera. And he was kind of the Navy's go-to guy whenever there were problems in the teams. He's finished out his entire career. He was always a reserve officer, but he just kept staying. Anyway, so he called me and we were pretty good friends. And he called and said, look, I got 2 questions. How would you like to go to Vietnam on something I don't even know? It comes out of McNamara's office and they won't tell us what it is. But and if it's yes, how soon can you ready to go? And I said, yes, sir, 24 hours. So I went over and had a cup of coffee with Tarbox, checked in the SEAL Team and then checked out and headed for Vietnam. So does the name Eagle Gallagher mean anything to you?
I feel like I've heard it before, but I can't place it.
Yeah, he's a Navy Cross guy in Vietnam. Hell of a guy. And so I went to the 25th reunion, and it was, those were the days before. We just all met in a bar down in Virginia Beach. And Gallagher walks up to me. He doesn't know who the hell I am. And Gallagher was a mean man. And Gallagher walks up to me and said, "Who the hell are you? And what are you doing here?" And I said, "Chief, I'm here because I belong here. And if you don't believe me, ask Starbucks." Because I'd spent the shortest amount of time in SEAL Team 2 of probably anybody in history.
Like 24 hours, right? It was almost the next day you fly out to Vietnam. And so there's no specific training for this mission that comes out of McNamara's office. Have you heard the words MACV-SOG? Have you heard about the maritime component? Have you heard about Gulf of Tonkin or Da Nang? Do you know where you're going and what you're doing?
Not even the Navy didn't know anything about it. It came right out of McNamara's office. It was considered the most politically sensitive operation in Vietnam at the time because there was stuff going north. And it was right at the time they formed SOG, MACV-SOG. And this was the Navy component. SOG actually was an Army command. And there was this Navy component stepped off up in Da Nang that nobody paid much attention to. But the Navy didn't know anything about it for at least 6 months or so. By the time I left in a year, the Navy was in it and inflating the jobs, et cetera. But and they had no boats. They had no small boats. First 3 Swifts in Vietnam were there because the CIA put them there. It was a CIA operation that we were taking over because McNamara, when he was there in 64, said, "Don't worry, folks, it'll all be over in 65." saw this operation. Yeah, exactly. So he saw this operation. Yeah, but nobody's learned a thing. Anyway, and so McNamara saw this operation, of course, not knowing, appreciating clandestine operations or anything. He thought, well, if this is good small, it'll be even better big, especially if we're trying to keep it quiet. So he ordered that the DOD take over the operation, expand it in size and intensity. And so I was one of the 5 guys that went over to set that up. There was me and the skipper of UDT-21, an admin guy, an engineering duty officer guy, and then a ship driver to be the commander because the Navy would never put, a frogman in charge.
I read about that guy in your book. Well, how did you get there? What was your...
No special training. It was just on the job.
Yeah.
I mean, when I took my when I learned how to free fall, it was on the China Beach in Da Nang, and a couple of chiefs gave me their chutes. We got an Army helicopter because the Army helicopter guys were the most cooperative, helpful guys in Vietnam. Got a helicopter, and they said, "Okay, Mr. Hawes, this is what you do. Out you go."
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I just, these guys have these wonderful schools they go to today, and it's just terrific. And it's better. It makes them better. No question.
Wow. Introducing the BCM Stock Mod 3 and Marksman Risers. Built from years of real-world experience, the BCM Mod 3 stock is the next evolution in M4 accessories. Minimalist, snag-free, and just 6.4 ounces with double-walled H-beam construction for unmatched durability. Paired with the Mark III Marksman Risers in 0.5 and 0.8 inches. The Mod 3 offers total customization with 6 mounting positions and forward or reverse orientation. It delivers a consistent cheek weld for passive night vision or CQB. For high-ready weapons manipulation, it features a removable diamond-textured butt pad, non-slip grip panels, and a quick-adjust design with integrated sling attachment points. Plus, its patented internal latch system and ergonomic lever ensure rugged performance with tool-free installation. Proudly made in the USA, the BCM Mod 3 stock, built to outlast and outperform. Get yours now at BravoCompanyUSA.com. How did you get there? So there's no training. You don't really know what the mission is as you're heading over. How do you get there? Do you go through Saigon first and then Da Nang, and then where do you get your first briefing?
Yeah, went to Saigon and we met the colonel who was taking over from the CIA guy, and he gave us 2 or 3 days worth of briefings. And this encapsulates Vietnam as far as I am concerned. after 3 days, this ship driver who was our commanding officer, the most politically sensitive covert operation in the country, each day after the briefing, we go back to the hotel, have a beer, and kind of talk things over, etc. After the third day of Ho Chi Minh this, Ho Chi Minh that, Uncle Ho this, Uncle Ho that, this dumbass redneck commander that the Viet Cong had placed there to be our boss says, "Hey, just who in the hell is this Ho Chi, whatever his name is, anyway?" That's how prepared we were.
Wow. Okay. So it's definitely on the job training. When you land in Vietnam, what are your first impressions of when you step off that plane in Saigon? What are your first impressions of Vietnam? What did it feel like when you got there?
Well, remember, there weren't that many Americans there at the time.
Because it's 1964.
That thing that hit me was just the heat, the humidity, and the smell. Whatever it was, it basically kept me in Asia for 35 years. So whatever it was, I liked it, and it meshed very well. But there weren't. I mean, being at this time a JG, there weren't many guys with the silver bar around. Because the Army was afraid that this wasn't going to last very long, and so everyone was there to, quote, get their ticket punched. So everybody was a major or higher. Then.
Yeah, you're a lieutenant junior grade.
Yeah, so it was so much different when I left. By when I left, now there were, a couple 100,000 people there, another couple 100,000 on the way. But my impressions were, I don't know. Well, I'd been to Hong Kong. I'd been to Asia on board that ship when I made that cruise to Westpac. So Asia wasn't all that foreign to me. Vietnam, of course, the first time. But, I loved it.
Okay. And then you fly up to Da Nang from there, and that's going to be where you stage for your operations.
And we're flying Da Nang, yeah. And the CIA took over the CIA operation there at the headquarters. It's called Bok Down in the White Elephant. That time it was the tallest building in Da Nang, which was three floors. And on one side of the building was our operation. On the other side of the building was our Vietnamese counterparts operation.
And what did it look like? What was your mission?
Oh, the mission was to run the harassment operations into the north, utilizing the boats and the commando teams that the agency had set up that we took over. And over on China Beach, area called MACV, that was the camp that when we wound down, Meyer's operation took over.
Mm-hmm.
Clear, totally different. I mean, when we got there was nothing but sand dunes and a beautiful beach.
Okay.
And then every mile along those dunes, we had a camp which isolated our commandos, which were these volunteers and NUMs. Everybody wanted NUMs. There was always a fight between us and the Special Forces guys who wanted to get the NUMs because the NUMs were treated so badly by the Vietnamese. They were happy to work for the Americans, and they were so good and so tough. And some of them we worked with had been decorated by the French in the early 50s. I mean, these were some really good guys. Anyway, so we had those teams that we were supposed to train. And then the CIA at that time had the first three SWIFTs in Vietnam, so those were supposed to be used to go into the north. But the agency guys mostly took jumps, fishing jumps, modified them, tried to make them blend in more to send the teams up. And they actually tried to get some teams in there to sit in place and stay in place. None of them were successful because nobody understood just how tightly policed North Vietnam was. And we didn't even try to put people who could stay behind here at all. We just sent people. We just went up for harassment operations where we would once. And the Navy had no small boats. All I had were those three SWIFTs, and they had no small boats. I'm not exaggerating, none. They were then smart enough to buy the nasty class BT boats, which were sensational boats, fabulous boats. So those became the vehicles which took the teams up north, and also had a 40 millimeter on aft, and it had an 81 millimeter mortar. So 81 millimeter on a floating platform. It's not worth much more than illumination.
Okay.
The Navy thought it. So we had the 81 millimeter mortars on there, and then we had the 40 millers, which were good. So we would go up and we would harass, the radar stations. We try to hit the radars. For example, another one. All these operations came out of McGeorge Bundy's office. They didn't come out of sight. We made the recommendations based on intel we had there locked down, and we would make the recommendations, and then they'd go to Washington. McGeorge Bundy's guys would do the headquarters pull on them. And so we used the nasties to take up the teams and do harassment on radars, coastal petroleum.
So you're going into North Vietnam. For those listening, so Da Nang is up there very far north of South Vietnam, for those listening. And so you're leaving from that area and you're going into North Vietnamese waters and shooting 40 millimeters into their radar installations. Is that an example of a harassment operation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the only way to go up there.
So interesting. So what was the intent of those operations?
Truth be told, I'm not sure I believe anybody who told me what we were able to accomplish or not accomplish. Okay, because I don't think anybody knows for sure. Somebody chose to believe that those harassment operations tied up a lot of Vietnamese to help secure those installations who otherwise would have been available to go south. I don't know. Maybe that's true. Oh, I sure like to think so, but I don't really know for sure. We had some really lucky hits, and a lot of the time all we did was throw metal in the air. But sometimes we had some lucky. For example, when we went up and did on Matt and on New and on May, just before the Gulf of Tonkin, we hit those guys. We did a lot of damage. So the only thing in that whole episode that makes sense to me is that I know that the North Vietnamese were pissed because we did some real damage, and also we were those islands were situated in the roads that led up to Haiphong. Now the first thing you understand the significance of Haiphong. That's where all the stuff came in. The Russian stuff came into Haiphong. The Chinese stuff came into Haiphong, and on the Red River, and there were 2 dredges there. If those dredges were put out of operation, the harbor would silt up in 6 weeks. Okay, 6 weeks. So genius that I was, as soon as we arrived and we looked at the intel, I said, well, this is easy. Let's go get those dredges. Not allowed to touch them. Never allowed to touch them till the very end. 10 years later. Almost 8 years later, whatever it was. Never allowed to touch them.
Why do you think that is?
I think it had to do, and reading the history and McNamara's attempts to justify his lies and bad decisions, they never paid any attention to, quote, know your enemy, unquote. They always thought that with a gradual approach, a gradual increase of pressure, intensity, violence, whatever, that eventually the Ho Chi Minh or the North Vietnamese would say, okay, that's enough. They never understood there was never going to be enough. Maybe there are indications that when Nixon halted the bomb was required to halt the bombing there at Christmas that time, they were almost ready to give up at that time. But other than that, our guys just chose, and our arrogance just chose to believe what we chose to believe. And that was that if we applied enough pressure, we were going to give up. Well, we're never going to give up. And so we never hit the dredges. We never hit the dikes. If we were determined to win, in the old definition of the word, we'd have shut down those dredges. We'd have on the dikes, and they'd have started them out. No way. So when we hit the islands on May and the lead up to the roads, the Vietnamese very likely said, well, maybe these guys are finally getting serious and they're going to come after our dredges. So that may have led to what people say provoked the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I don't know. Sure.
I wanted to ask you about that specifically. So Gulf of Tonkin, August 4th, I believe, 1964. And you are there, and you have interactions with the boats that essentially are the ones that instigate, quote unquote, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So what was your involvement at the time? What was your understanding of what you were doing? And then when you look back on it, what do you think about your time there in relation to the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
I'll tell you the high technology way we interfaced with the DeSoto patrols. I took my hat and I wrote the alphabet on little pieces of paper, and I put them in my hat and I shook it up and I took them out, and that's what we communicated to the destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin for any exchange of signals in case they wanted to know if those were our boats or north of any SWAT house or not. That is the only interaction we had with them. And so anyone who thinks that there was coordination and blah, 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 not so. And remember, I was a training officer and the assistant ops officer. So I was in a position to have a pretty good idea. Anyway, so no, to us, hitting on that was just another op. It was like hitting Vin or any oil depot or whatever, anything else that we had been doing in the 3.5 months leading up to that, when we had increased the frequency and intensity of the efforts into the north. Because when the agency was dealing with junks, it took a long time to get a junk reconfigured, whatever, made ready to go and shuttle it. So when we got in there and got the boats, we really accelerated the operations. We had been chased by SWAT house in previous operations, but never very far. And of course, they couldn't catch they couldn't outrun or outgun the nasties anyway. So we didn't anticipate anything. So the so-called Gulf of Tonkin incident was a total surprise to us. And then when the guys at headquarters panicked over the whole situation, they were afraid that the North Vietnamese were going to retaliate against our nasties, so against us in the harbor in Da Nang. So I took the nasties and a satchel of piastres, the local currency, and some sacks of rice, and we boarded, just me and the Vietnamese crews. We boarded the nasties and went down to Cam Ranh Bay to hide out because, again, the guys at headquarters, the guys in Washington were, my opinion, overreacted. They reacted. So, and we had no charts. I had a 1903 French chart, which we got from our Vietnamese counterparts, to go to Cam Ranh Bay with. It was pristine. Jack, it was so beautiful. I can't tell you. And there was one pier there that had been built, I don't know when. And it was a little junk force trading base, all Vietnamese, little junk force trading base. And the dunes that created the peninsula, that created the bay, the Dai Wei, the captain of the junk base, used to hunt big cats there. And that's how it was. I can't tell you how wonderful, nice it was. Less than 2 years later, it had been leveled and it turned in the 101st Resupply Depot. I mean, just left. Anyway, so we arrived there, and I got met by a guy you might know or sure know of, Bob Peterson, because he was with Hawes in Saigon. So he came up to greet us there. Hell of a guy. And so we lived on the pier where things supposedly blew over. And we had our mom, we got our rice, and one of the guys got a junk and went over to the village of Cam Ranh, got a calf. So I brought the calf back, so we had meat and rice and whatnot. And so, very good. But I had to get some, then I had to arrange for fuel to get, and all this time we're supposed to be dodging the International Control Commission, because that was made up of these so-called inspectors. One was a Pole, one was a Indian, and one was a, I can't remember, more pro-Western guy. And they were the ones who were supposed to be telling the world if we were up to dastardly deeds or not. And then so Dean Rusk would deny it the next day. I did some fuel, so I got the junk and went over to Cameron Village, got the only vehicle in the village, and I knew there was a Special Forces base between Cameron Bay and the train where I had to go get my fuel. And so I get the vehicle, the taxi, for lack of a better word, taxi to take me up the road to the Special Forces base, and there's a Special Forces captain there. And I walked in, and when I've been in the same greens with no insignias, no nothing for a week now. Was that, Captain, I know I don't look or smell like it, but I'm a naval officer. And I got some boats down at Cameron Bay that were hiding out, and I got to get in the trunk to get some fuel. Can you help me out? He said, sure. Here's a tree, here's a chief, here's a driver. Just make sure you're off the road by dark. So up we went and arranged for fuel. And then I went again to these army, and with these army guys, had the guy had the spotter planes. And I walked in and I said, look, I know I don't look like it or smell like it, but I'm a naval officer, blah, blah, blah. I got these boats down. I can give you a lift back to Natron. He said, sure, hop in. So he flies me down to Natron and drops me off. So we then go up to Natron, refuel, and head back to Da Nang. That's the end of the adventure.
All right, this is Jack Carr, and I want to talk a little bit today about Only the Dead. If you've read the previous novels and this one, you'll know that each of my books has a theme. And the theme of Only the Dead is truth and consequences. And I have the SIG Rattler featured in this book because I had some friends out there at the time who were using this setup for real. So I incorporated it into the narrative. And I write, the AR was a SIG Rattler in 300 blackout, with an aim-point micro red dot sight and folding front and rear iron sights. Reese extended the brace as far back as it would go, gave the weapon a press check, and ensured the red dot was illuminated. It was ready to rock. He turned his eyes to the bed. Not yet. He set the SIG down and then stripped off the sheets and blankets, spreading them on the floor. He then went to the bathroom and pulled a towel from the rack, pushing it up against the base of the door to block out what little light escaped from the main room. He then removed his pistol, holster, belt, wallet, and cash from his pockets and arranged them next to the Rattler. He ran his finger over the name on the envelope. It was in blue ink, in his father's distinctive script. It looked like Tom Reese could have written it yesterday. That was the thing about letters, about signatures. They connect us to the past. Reese was not yet ready to read it. He gave it one last look before placing it next to the high power and lying down in the blankets. Pulling the comforter over himself, Reese was asleep in seconds. So I had some friends out there doing the job for real who were using the Rattler right here in this configuration, pretty much, with the aim point right there, with the backup irons, and there's had suppressors though. I need to get a suppressor for this bad boy right here, but pretty compact and 300 blackout, fits nicely into satchels. Indiana Jones carries one, or backpack. So pretty slick little setup right here that also feels really good as well. So there it is, SIG Rattler. Well done. Looking back on the Gulf of Tonkin, what are your thoughts on it now, all these years later?
I think everyone out there was so spooked. I mean, it was like when the Marines landed in March in Da Nang in March of 1605. You know, there were these pretty little Vietnamese girls on the beach wanting to give them flower lace. They came storming ashore like it was Okinawa. I mean, Okinawa or Iwo Jima. And all they did was screw up what was kind of a neutral territory. The Viet Cong didn't bother us in Da Nang. We didn't bother the Viet Cong in Da Nang. And then the Marines came in and upset the harmony. Well, because they were so fired up. They had them so fired up. Well, I think they had these guys and these destroyers so so spooked that it's very likely that the SWAT cows made a run. Okay, I think when the first SWAT cow got hit, I think they lost all their enthusiasm. I mean, after all, a SWAT cow going up against a destroyer, the Vietnamese were brave as hell, but they didn't tend to be suicidal like that, like wearing an explosive vest type mentality.
Yeah.
And I think Johnson was so anxious, and the big army was so anxious to get this declared a war so that they could unleash a whole lot of other things that they wanted to do. I think it was mostly contrived, my opinion.
Interesting.
I mean, look, if they knew in 1965 that we couldn't win, they knew in 65 we couldn't win, and they were prepared to sacrifice another 50,000 guys. Did they give a damn? No, not my opinion. I've gone from true believer to pretty skeptical.
Yeah. Did reading McNamara's biography, you mentioned you read McNamara's biography. What did you feel when you read that?
He died a painful death because deep down, he was a really smart guy. And deep down, he knew what he had done. He was so desperate, I think, to try to put salve on his history, that he went through all these mental gyrations of trying to rationalize why he did what he did. But the fact is, he lied. He didn't have the guts to do the right thing, or the moral fiber being right thing water. And Johnson conned him. Johnson flat conned him, as far as I'm concerned. And then he rewarded him with the World Bank job and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm very unforgiving about McNamara. Most of those guys.
Yeah, that biography is something else.
How do you have a strategy of attrition? Attrition was a strategy when the birth rate in the North always exceeded the kill rate in the South. Okay, duh.
Interesting.
When I arrived, we were there to be trainers, mentors, instructors, supporters, whatever. It was supposed to be the Vietnamese War. When I left and they were Vietnamese, when I got on that plane to leave Saigon, I met guys who we're going to show these guys how to win. We're going to show these guys. We're going to take over now. These slopes. They went from Vietnamese to being slopes. And it went from we're here to help, it's their war, to we're going to show these guys how to do it.
Interesting.
And that's nothing but training and preparation and leadership, all of which failed, at least above the level of major, in my opinion.
Yeah. What did you carry over there when you got there? Were you issued a sidearm? Did you carry a 1911 or a Browning high power? What were you issued as far as your weapons when you got to Vietnam?
We didn't do a lot of weapons training before I went. And I carried and we had the first AR-15s in Vietnam. We had them if we wanted them. I didn't want anything that shot that fast. I carried a grease gun and a sawed-off shotgun. And I liked the grease gun because number one is a 45. Number two, you could get it sandy, and you didn't. I'm not a weapons guy. I mean, I just want it's a tool. It's a tool. I don't want a tool that is 100% reliable, and I don't have to diddle with it. I just wanted to shoot what I wanted to shoot. And everything we were doing was close quarter enough, at least that sawed-off shotgun was very forgiving.
Yeah.
So that's what I carried. Now we had everything available to us. We get Swedish Ks, Sten guns, you name it, because we had the whole CIA arsenal that brought down control. Yeah, we were the first guys. Our guys at MACV were the first guys to get the AR-15s, and there was a lot of problems with them at the beginning. A lot of and they weren't weren't very forgiving of the sand.
Yeah,
and so forth. That's what I loved about that grease man. You take it and search along wherever, and it was going to shoot.
Yeah. Well, even today, the M4 AR platform is not very forgiving in the sand, so not much has changed with that anyway. Yeah. There's a great book called The Gun by C.J. Chivers that talks about that and the development of the AK, AKM, and then the M16. Car 15. It's a really interesting book. What watch did you get issued? Were you at SEAL Team 2 long enough to get issued a Tudor or anything like that?
I got one from the CIA when I got to Da Nang. They had a bunch of it.
A bunch of Tudors?
I can't remember what it was, but it was like a Rolex, but it wasn't a Rolex.
Probably a Tudor. Yeah, probably a Tudor Submariner. Oh, that's amazing. Did you keep it?
No, I know where I lost it. Oh. I had several of those I lost. Everybody in my class, when we graduated from training, everybody went to St. Thomas. Everybody bought Rolexes because you duty free at St. Thomas. It cost $250. Those oyster perpetual.
Yeah, a little more than that now.
Well, not me.
You should have bought 20 of them. Oh man. Amazing. And when you look back at your time in Vietnam now, what lessons did you take from that experience that you would then carry forward with you to your time in the CIA?
I learned to listen. Most of all my experience, both in the teams and in the agency, was alone. I never had I really understood the value of teams, and I always tried to build a team, but I was never surrounded by a team like our guys.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I learned in Vietnam is to listen, because those local guys, they keep you out of a lot of trouble if you just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too, that mentality, well, we're going to show these guys how to do it, and blah, 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 blah. We certainly had a lot to teach and a lot to impart, but it was definitely a two-way street. And some of those guys were brave as hell. Some of those Vietnamese were brave as hell. And there was this fabulous agency guy who adopted me named Tucker Google. And I never met anybody in my whole life who could immediately obtain the respect and affection of other cultures, other races, other people. He was just an extraordinary guy. I mean, just an extraordinary guy. So I learned a lot just watching him and watching the way he dealt with them. I think that made me a lot better for what it came about in my subsequent years.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing was, embrace the locals. Embrace the locals. We're not known for our cultural sensitivity, and we can can go through some hard lessons to learn.
Yeah. And how do you get from the SEAL teams doing that job in Da Nang, and how do you get to the CIA?
Well, Tucker, Tucker was the chief of base when we went in there. So I worked closely with Tucker. I actually went on a couple of his operations with him. We really got on. He was a hell of a guy. He had been an orator in World War II. Got shot up on, they didn't know which one island it was, and they wanted to take off his leg. He wouldn't let him, but they put him in the hospital, and he got surveyed from the Marine Corps as a colonel. So he then joined OSS, and he was then in Eastern Europe, just ahead of the curtain as it fell in each country. And then he was in Shanghai when Chairman Mao became the landlord.
Wow.
And I woke up one kind of this Chinese buddy getting out by boat from Shanghai down to Hong Kong. And then he trained the Chinese in Saipan at the training that we had there. We'd send these poor guys into China. He did the same thing in Tibet. He and then he came in a couple other places, and then he came to Vietnam.
Wow.
So he was just an extraordinary guy. He's very smart, and he just had a way. He just had a way with getting these. I never saw anybody that just grabbed that foreign culture and they would just embrace it. I mean, it just was astounding. Wow. Even the women, this guy, Tucker had a pretty foul mouth, but when he was around women, the women acted like it was poetry because it came from Tucker. I don't know how he did it.
So, some guys have the gift, Some guys have the gift. What could you do? Oh, that's amazing. So wow. you go over to the CIA, and this time, before you go to the Congo, do you get any specific training for your mission in the Congo?
Well, I had the best training I'd had for what I did in the Congo. I'd had the best training, and that was being an instructor and being in Vietnam and this. There were only two officers that had swift boat experience, and that was me and a guy named Phil Holtz, who was a flight boater of SEAL Team 1. And he was actually the first SEAL to go to Vietnam when the guys were going there like in 1962 for Vietnam with the agency and so forth. So Phil was when I arrived, Phil was already there. He was sheepdilled with the agency, so he wasn't involved with what we were doing very much. But he and I were the only two guys that had shipboard experience. So when I left Vietnam and was in Little Creek getting ready to go see Tarbox and say, okay, sign me up, I'm ready to go back, I get a call from Phil. And Phil says, look, I'm in the career training program. I'm getting ready to start the career training program. He got on the Navy, joined the agency. And Barbara's about to pop with their first child. And they want me to go to the Congo, and I don't want to say no, but I don't want to leave now. Are you interested? And I say, geez, Phil, you mean am I going to get paid? So that was, I said, yeah, sign me up. So he says, okay, and so he goes to Bill Hamilton. Bill Hamilton being an old frog. He was head of the maritime branch of the Special Operations Division in the agency. And he was a hell of a guy. I mean, he was a West Point guy who had been a naval aviator and jet in Korea, and just decided he wanted to be a frogman.
Wow.
And in those, if you want a career in the Navy, the last thing you want to do as an officer is be a frogman. Well, Hamilton wanted to be a frogman. His dad had been an admiral. He had his way there. He was handsome, smart, charming, he had everything. And he was very critical in the formation of the teams in 1962, because he was at Octanav 59 right at that time. And the East Coast and the West Coast used to have stupid arguments about who was more important. Hamilton. Stupid argument. The fact was they were all outstanding guys, and they were all critical. But Hamilton was the guy in the Pentagon, and he was very helpful. Because Hamilton had been UDU-2. In those days, it's called Underwater Demolition Unit, and it was 21 and 22, and I think the Beach Jumper Unit or something. That all composed you. So Hamilton, as a lieutenant commander or something, was sent UDU-2. So he called, and and said, hey, why aren't you coming up and we'll talk? I said, sure. So he didn't have trouble checking me out, of course, in the community. He just wanted to know if I knew anything about Swifts. And I didn't know why exactly he wanted to know that. But I went up, and we really hit it off. And so he said, okay, and he sent me to the head of the Special Operations Division, a guy named Bruce Cheever, who was a retired Marine colonel, really fascinating guy. Anyway, so Bruce Cheever and he didn't care. He trusted Hamilton's recommendation. He just wanted to know if I was the kind of guy at 25 at that time, whatever, that could go to the Congo and be totally on his own and have these weapons and this money and do the job. And so I spent 45 minutes with Cheever and somehow or other managed to pass the test. And so I'm ready to go, not knowing. So at this point, I know Hamilton, I know Cheever. That's it. That's what I knew about the CIA. So Cheever said, hey, look, this guy needs to get to an ops familiarization course, which is several weeks course. And they had one down in Tucson, Arizona, at that time, Marana Air Base, which in Marana was a proprietary and for stuff, as well as training smoke jumpers and stuff. They got a lot of kickers and Laos people that came out of Marana. So I went down there and learned a little bit about what the agency was all about and so forth. When I came back, and I was ready to go. I got to tell you, Jack, the attitude in the agency when they said, okay, there's a crisis, was whoopee, we got a crisis. Well, what can we do to help? That's all I do is, what do you want? I want this. Okay, what else do you want? I don't want that. I mean, everybody, the secretaries, the branch chiefs, they just couldn't do enough. So, yeah, so I got, for example, can you imagine today going around with morphine? Well, I went to the guys and said, look, some of these guys are going to get hit, or we're going to see guys get shot. Can I take some morphine? Yeah, sure, here. Boom. So that's what that reference was in the book. That's I took it with me. So I flew over and got met by Dick Johnson, who was going to be my boss. He was head of all my paramilitary operations in the Congo because he had pretty big air operation. And he had been a chief of station in South America, so he was a real proven guy. And he was such a good man. I cannot tell you what a good man he was. But I had to pass. So he picked me up at the airport, and I had to pass his test. He could have sent me home. He didn't think I was the right guy. He wouldn't have. Then no one would question. He said, "This is not the right guy. I want it." So by the time we got to the embassy from the airport, we'd settled that matter satisfactorily. And he basically said, look, Jim, you got to figure it out. He said, you're going to be almost 2,000 miles across the jungle. And we don't have any communication other than the courier on the supply planes that we send in. There's going to be a Morse code guy, but with one-time pads, but that's mostly for intel stuff. He said, so you're on your own. I'll try to help you as much as I can, but you got to figure it out. So can you imagine telling a young SEAL officer, if you're on your own, you got to figure it out? That's like,
yeah.
Those
are my favorite. Those are my favorite. Yeah, because it usually means that you're away from the flagpole and you're one of the first people to go and do something, so you get to really shape it. So I love that. How aware of you were you about what was going on in the Congo at the time? Were you briefed up on what was happening over there? Did you know your mission before you flew in? And how aware of you were the history with Belgium and King Leopold and the Heart of Darkness? How aware were you of that situation on the ground?
Well, of course, I read Heart of Darkness, of course, a long time ago. And I got pretty good briefings from Hamilton and his deputy, Tom Kleins, who was also a hell of a guy. And so I was fairly well briefed. But, other than giving you the overall political situation, how do you talk about what's going on in Albertville if you've never been there? None of these guys have ever really been there. Mm. So, I did get to talk to one guy who had been there briefly, and but the guy I was replacing, they were hiding him because he had done the right thing for the mission and the wrong thing for the State Department. So the agency was divided on, do we make it, do we kick his ass or do we give him a medal? And of course the special operations guys want to give him a medal. But anyway, so they had him hiding out, basically. So I didn't really get a chance to talk to him because he did a hell of a job. He was really good. And yeah, so when I got there, of course, I got all the briefing that Dick could give me. But basically, it was, as he said when we were riding in from the airport, you're on your own. I'll help as much as I can, but you got to figure it out. So that was it.
And when you fly in, there had previously been these massacres by Soviet Chinese-backed insurgent groups. You fly into Stanleyville, I believe, which is now Kisangani.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you get there. What is the situation on the ground? Tell me about the Simba rebels.
When I went to Albertville, we went via the supply plane went Leopoldville, Stanleyville, Albertville, Stanleyville, Leopoldville. So when I went in Stanleyville, and Stanleyville was still pretty deserted. I got to tell you, I don't know if you're a Christian. If you are, you tend not to believe in spirits. But I got to tell you, there were spirits in Stanleyville, bad spirits. I mean, you could feel the blood. You could feel it. It was when I get off that airplane in Stanleyville, I thought, oh, Jesus, I do not want to be here. I mean, it was you just could feel the evil. I know how that must sound, but
well,
I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, it won't surprise people who have read, what is it, King Leopold's Ghost? I don't know if you read that. It came out in the late 90s, so it's been a little bit of time, but it's people should read that.
Yeah, it should. Anyway, so and there weren't many people there. There were still hiding out in the jungle and so forth because the Semblers were all over Semblers were all around, despite what the mercenaries were doing. And it hadn't been all that long before they had the massacre, which is the reason for the town was deserted and so full of blood spirits.
Yeah.
It was the Belgians the paratroopers take credit for that rescue. The 5 Commando takes credit for that rescue, but the guys who really got there first were the Cubans, led by a guy named by a paramilitary SOD paramilitary guy named Rip Robertson, whom you never heard of because he kept the code. It's interesting how many of these guys didn't write. I mean, I waited 50 years to write my book to keep the code.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that right here. I mean, 50 years passed, and for those of us that are vaguely aware of that history, there's so much that I learned in here that I didn't know, and it's fascinating history and so well written as well. So I really hope everybody picks this up. It's fascinating.
Actually, I wrote a lot of the stories, 25 years at the end of 25 years when I was in Hong Kong. Because I didn't want to get, as we get older, the older we get, the smarter, tougher, faster we were. And I didn't want that. I really wanted to try to get it right. I really wanted to try to get it right. So I mostly wrote it down after 25 years and then waited another 25. And then I met Marianne and she cleaned it up.
Yeah. Well, so you were only faster, stronger, smarter by half then, because you made it 25, not the 50.
And I didn't want any of these. I mean, now that I've tried to write a history, I know it's hard. It's hard to be accurate. I mean, I found things that I knew weren't true when I started doing my own research on the things to verify some of the things that I thought I knew. You know better than I. You've done so much more writing than I have. But I wanted a first-hand account. I didn't want any of these historians who had never been there, didn't understand the smell, the feel, or whatever, to try to rewrite this thing. Mm-hmm. So now at least they have a first-hand account. They got to pay attention to some.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well,
and you read the cable traffic that goes back from the embassy. That's interesting, because what I would tell the embassy and what the embassy would tell headquarters was not always identical, because the embassy they all want to get promoted. So it's anyway, this is a lot.
Yeah. Well, when I come up for air, I have a few different writing projects going on right now. So even just doing something like a blog or an essay is difficult because of all these other projects. But I want to put together a reading list, but kind of a guide to the Congo, to what was going on there, essentially from the late 1800s through today. And in reading this is now going to be a part of that canon, which of course includes Heart of Darkness, includes some of the other people down there, Joseph Conrad's real life story, of course, King Leopold's ghost later, some other histories that have been done, to include watching Apocalypse Now, watching the documentary on making Apocalypse Now, but put it in an order so people can get the span of the history, but also its impact on popular culture, like Apocalypse Now and Vietnam. So I'm going to put that out there at some point, but this is going to be now part of that canon because it's really the bookends between the late 1800s and what you do here. It just makes for such an arc. And so I really appreciate you writing this because of my specific interest in that area.
Well, one thing that's in there was interesting, and you talked about the things that impact the areas that you might be working in. I had, I tried to get it, as I said, the thing I learned to get done about listening, and I really try to get into the culture wherever I am. I really try to get into it. And I found this missionary, this Belgian missionary, who had a little woodworking school in the middle of nowhere, not too far from Albertville. So I went over there, and he was, really hurt because all the Belgians, everybody else hauled ass when the first shots started getting fired. But not this priest, man. He was toughing it out. He had a leg that looked like a corkscrew because when the Simbas had come through first time, they broke his legs one way, and then when they came through again, they broke his legs another way. So I mean, this guy was he was tough. Wow, was he tough? And he's trying to run his woodworking school with, he's still got some African kids there that are trying to learn and so forth. I had him make me a whole set of furniture, which I managed to ship back. Don't ask me how I did it. I can't remember how I did it, but I got it back. I still have pieces of it.
Wow,
they're precious. It's African teak, and it's really well done.
Wow, I love that.
People like that, and people like Tassos, the great guy that I mentioned in the book, who gave me my intelligence. Basically, he gave me my intelligence network on every port on Lake Tanganyika. Hell of a guy.
Yeah.
Hell of a guy.
Well, speaking of that, so what is your mission there in the Congo?
Oh, well, it was to interdict the supplies that were coming up to the rebels from Kigoma in Tanganyika at that one. All the weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, food, etc., is coming across Lake Tanganyika from Goma to the various reception areas that the Simbas and Che had along the shore of Lake Tanganyika. So we had to interrupt that. We had to interdict that. And that was the mission. Stop it. Bring it to a halt, which nobody has to believe me. All I have to do is read Che Guevara's diary, and I'd see he acknowledged that we did it.
That's right. I was going to ask you about that. He talks about you guys in there and your impact on operations. So I'm going to go back and check that out because I have that. Tell me about Mad Mike Hoare and 5 Commando.
Mad Mike Hoare was not happy to receive me because he wanted to be my boss and I didn't need a boss. And also I was taking away the best people in 5 Commando to be in the Navy, including his regimental sergeant major, which is maybe the most important guy he had. Because as you know, in the British system, the regimental sergeant major, he's the man. Mm-hmm. And so I got Cassie to come over to the Navy and be my captain of my Navy. And then with Cassidy, because he had trained every single one of the mercenaries, we got the file on every one of the mercenaries in his head. So I said, well, just get the best guys. So he got the best of a bad punch. And that became the guys that we trained to operate our boats and to be our sailors.
That is amazing. And for people who don't know, who is Mad Mike Hoare, for people who don't know?
Well, Mike Hoare was the most famous or notorious or infamous, take your choice, mercenary of the 20th century. And he had been there, and he is a World War II guy, British trained, so was very well trained. And he had been with Mountbatten's command in India during the Second World War. And he came back and did mundane stuff, and somehow or other pitched up in South Africa because he was a venturer. Pitched up in South Africa, and he was in Katanga at the secession when Congo went independent in 1960. Almost immediately Katanga seceded. Katanga being the most productive, economically productive province in Congo at the time. And it was a guy named Moise Shambi. Moise Shambi, but the New York Times, John Kennedy, the best and brightest, the United Nations, they were determined that the Congo was going to be the Congo, despite the fact that they took no account of all the tribes, no account of all the languages, no account of all the tribal hatreds, nothing. This is going to be the borders. Boom, that's it. Well, we've seen what happened in the subsequent 60 years. It's been a total failure. Well, they made a few people extremely rich and prepared to do a lot of the bodies of a lot of other people. Shambi wanted to say that, look, this is not on. I'm going to secede. I'm going to take the Katanga. We're going to be a viable country. So he had his own army, and Hoare came up to be a mercenary in that army. That's how he first got to Congo. Well, the secession did not succeed because of the participants that I just mentioned who were determined to make sure it did. And so Hoare left. And then when the Simba rebellion got so bad in 1964, and the too many missionaries were getting eaten literally by little Simbas, and the West decided they needed to do something about it. They called Mobutu, who was head of the army at the time, called for Mike Hoare from days gone by. So Hoare came up to form the fifth, what do you call it, 5 Commando. There was a Belgian commando and which I never paid any attention to, and then Hoare had the 5 Commando, were just British Commonwealth people, mostly white Africans, and he had good soldiering skills. He knew people. He was a prima donna and an egotist that I didn't like him, but I thought he was exactly the right guy for the job. I mean, exactly the right guy for the job. You had to be everything he was to be successful. He knew good soldiering, but he was also a prima donna. He knew how to talk to a village chief. He knew how to talk to a minister or general, whatever. He had it all. He had all the skills necessary. I didn't like the fact that he was a prima donna, but that's just me. And but as I say, he was the right guy for the job. He didn't want me there because he wanted to be in charge. He wanted to control the Navy. I said, look, I don't need a boss. I'm here to set up an interdiction program. Okay, that's my mission. If you don't like it, go talk to Dick Johnson. But I said, I'm here to set up an interdiction operation. Now, I will support your operation, because we support this. And you can see, I'll support your operation better than you could do it if you had it under your command and couldn't pay as much attention to it as I'll pay. Then, but that's the way it's going to be. So he finally got used to that. We met every day, almost every day that they were out campaigning, every day at 4:00 to plan or work on operations that were, imminent or forthcoming.
Yeah.
So we had an excellent working relationship. I didn't particularly like him, he didn't particularly like me, but we had an excellent working relationship, and I thought he was the right guy for the job.
Why do you think you guys were so effective in interdicting weapons coming into the Congo?
First of all, we had the equipment. When we brought in the Swifts, which is an hell of a story in of itself.
Right.
What we thought when I started writing this book, and I thought we were so smart to do what we did with the Swifts. There's a book called Mimi and Tutu. You remember the African Queen?
Yeah, of course.
The movie,
and the book.
Okay.
And the book.
The African Queen was found 100 miles, whatever it is, from where my base was in Albertville. That's where it was filmed. And Albert and Tutu were two vessels that the British brought overland from South Africa and put into the Lake Tanganyika. And those were the boats that destroyed the German vessels on Lake Tanganyika, which was portrayed in the African Queen.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Anyway, so our job was to interdict. So we had the Swifts, which are exactly the right boats. Mm. We had the Hermans, the lake vessel that we commandeered and armed with mostly Russian weapons that we captured. And then we had the little what most people would consider like Boston whalers. They were called sea craft in those days. Mm. And it was like the early days of the inboard outboard boats. And so we had on the Hermans, we had a radar and line of sight radio, so they would detect things and they could vector the little sea crafts but the Swifts could operate independently the whole lake. Remember, this lake has got the second largest volume of water in the world. Wow. Is 450 miles long and 50 miles wide. So it's like, it's like going from Tampa to Charleston or something, and on a patrol. I mean, wow. It's a big boat. The wind gets blowing in the wrong way, and the storms come up. It's a big funnel. I mean, you get 8-foot swells.
Yeah,
it can be a nasty lake. But anyway, so we had the right vessels, and then we had the right guys. I mean, to have the Cubans come in and lead off the operation, and then start and train the mercenaries. I mean, the concept was perfect, and that was I'd like to take credit for that. That was Hamilton and Klein's that did that. Klein's had such a trust relationship with those Cubans. They didn't even know where they were going when they signed up. They just trusted Klein's, and he told them we were going to kill some communists.
Wow. And people are probably hearing that aren't really familiar with this part of history. They're hearing Cubans in the Congo and Cuban exiles in the Congo. Can you talk about that dynamic versus the Cuban exiles and then Che Guevara?
Yeah, the Cubans were the exact right contribution to the solution because they were experienced, they were motivated, they were loyal, they were totally trustworthy. We never had one single problem with one single Cuban that whole time. They were so proud of their professionalism, their performance, and so forth. The State Department was, of course, scared to death that the world would find out that we had Cubans in the Congo. So it had to be kept really, really, really quiet. And they from day one, they wanted the Cubans out of there as fast as possible. Well, as the Cubans stayed, that became less urgent because no one was really paying attention. You can't bring your makeup artist in your hairdresser to Albertville along with your cameras and everything else. So we were there. They were there, and so we had in Hamilton and Klein's understood. Well, they understood what we needed, and we got it. That's what it amounts to. So that we could maintain a constant interdiction operation of one kind or another on that lake from the time we went into business. And that's what did it. That we just started, we were starting out. We started out. Plus, Che Guevara was so stupid. You know, he was so full of himself and his own fate and psychopathy and sociopathy that he didn't understand where he was. He's kind of like a more sinister version of McNamara. He didn't understand he didn't understand the enemy. He didn't understand his environment. He was such a romantic revolutionary and so full of himself. He thought he was going to go over there and motivate all these guys, and he didn't happen. Didn't happen. And so we put enough pressure on his guys that eventually went to him and said, "Look, boss, we'll stay here and die with you, but that's what's going to happen. We're going to stay here and die." And that finally, Che said, "Yeah, well, I guess I don't have the right to kill my own guys." So he gave up.
Wow.
But it's in the book. Nobody has to believe me. Thank you, Che.
Yeah. And his mission, he was exporting revolution. Is that right?
Yeah, he was exporting the revolution. Exactly right. Exactly right. He didn't give a damn. He couldn't build anything. He was Minister of Industry in Cuba after the revolution. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. He was bored. He didn't want to be a revolutionary. He wanted to be killing people. He went into the prison there from time to time. He told people just stay in practice. You're the nasty. These guys running around with Che Guevara t-shirts on. They have no idea what it is they're actually representing. It was terrible, man. Terrible.
Yeah. And how aware were you of him? I know you're aware of his activities, but how aware of him were you as a person? Was he like let's say like today we'd call him like an HVT or an HVI, high value target, high value individual. Was he someone who was on your radar at that time?
No, because nobody knew where he was. When we arrived, no intelligence, the U.S. intelligence community did not know where Che Guevara was. They just knew he wasn't in Cuba, and where he was, there was probably going to be some trouble. That's what they knew. They didn't know for sure that he was in Cuba till we proved it.
Congo, yeah.
And as soon as we substantiated that there were Cubans there were communist Cubans in Guevara Cubans in the Congo, and then less than a week later, the 5 commandos hit a camp and they got documents that evidenced it. So they didn't have to believe us. They then had the written evidence. Documents and so forth.
Wow.
That's how they found out. That's how we found out. And of course, as soon as they found that out, then they sent this intel guy to the base to be a chief of base. Up to that point, there was nobody there but me. And they sent this guy to be chief of base. And he didn't last long, but wow. They were there to try to get home.
And so what eventually happens to them? They eventually pack up and just go home.
Yeah. So they on the November I think it's the 20th, 1965, we thought we had him. We thought we were going to kill Che Guevara on 20th of November, 1965. And we were there with the boats. We were poised, having a pretty good idea where they were going to try to escape from. This is crazy. Right at that time, one of the T-28 pilots crashed in the water. Our boats went to try to help him. We got to divert him because he was crashed in the water. So the boats that we diverted to go to try to see if there's anything we could do for this guy, and that had to be at the point Che made us escape, because we just can't see how it could have happened any other way. Because we had the lake locked up by Che's own admission. We had the lake locked up. We just diverted for that day or whatever we'd spent trying to help that guy, or trying to see if we could be of help to that guy. And that's when he got away. So he got away, and unfortunately he went to Bolivia.
Yeah.
and
Well,
dealt with it. Cool.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I was going to ask you about Gooch and November, December 1965.
Can I start out with the boats?
Yes.
Getting the boats full? Because in order to get the switch there, and they really made the equipment difference because they had the speed and the firepower. All that. Hamilton went down to Seward Seacraft, which he built the Swifts, and he knew him because the agency had bought so many Swifts, and said, "Look, boys, we want to take these to the Congo, but we got to do it surreptitiously. What do you suggest?" So they cut the superstructure off the Swifts, cuts the bow off the ship, cut them longitudinally, stuck them into two Globemasters with the engines and the parts, guys, whatever, and flew them into the middle of the Congo. There was a narrow gauge railroad that ran beside the airstrip there outside of Albertville. So we unloaded them, put them on the thing, took them to what was remaining of the port at Albertville, which did have a crane that was still operable, and the coon houses put them all back together. I cannot tell you enough about those guys. They were absolutely terrific. They worked from sun up to sundown. They got those boats stitched back together in a month, and everybody seemed to get 2 or 3. All they needed was a beer at the end of the day and a laugh. I mean, they were. I can't say much more about it. Anyway, and then Hamilton brought out a guy named Joe Gresh, who was an engineman who could make a diesel engine sing. So we had, when everybody left, we had those boats ready to go. The day after they left, we were in operation. We were on patrol. Then Hamilton wisely said, "You got to keep those things running. Jim's not much of a mechanic." Well, so he called Gooch, and Gooch is happily on his converted skipjack tender that he rebuilt in St. Thomas, happily with his wife and family, just living the good life. So Hamilton went to him and said, "Butch, we need you in the Congo." And he saluted and said, "Yes, sir." So Gooch came out, and he was just most wonderful man. He could do anything. He could fix anything. And he had a super personality and was experienced and smart and tough. Everybody really took him. He was really good. He was just such a good guy. And yeah, I mean, such great. It was so sad. So yeah, so he was driving down with these guys the night before they left. These 2 mercenary guys who were officers, of course, and this Congolese army guy had left a six spot in the middle of the road and pitch dark. They broke down. They just drove on. They just drove right into the back of it. Gooch was in the shotgun seat, and he killed instantly. The driver died a little slower, and the guy in the back seat lived. And that was it. So they woke me the next morning, and that's when I found out, when I woke the next morning, and Cassidy and I had to get wood, and we hammered together a coffin and stuck Gooch into the coffin. And then we found some old heavy sailcloth and wrapped the coffin in the sailcloth and took it down to the port, where there was still a little bit of refrigeration. And we put it in there till the embassy got a plane over to take his body to get back to Leopoldville for medical treatment, and then back to the States. I was instructed, I never forgiven myself I was instructed not to speak to the family. I intellectually understood the reason for what, but I never forgave myself for obeying that order. The agency took good care of the family. That wasn't the problem. They just never got the satisfaction of knowing Jim, who was his colleague, his partner, his teammate, and the guy, and getting the story like any family would like to have. That happened then when I wrote this book, and we stay informed.
Yeah. When do you leave the Congo? And when you leave, do you know that your mission has been a success, or do you find out years later?
Oh no, we knew it had been a success because because, Che had given up and he had gone. The Simbas had very well given up. Even in those days, if you're keeping track of what's going on in Eastern Congo now with Rwanda and M23 and so forth, even in those days, Rwanda had a couple of officers attached to Che. Most people don't know that. I don't think, no, but I don't know anybody knows that if they didn't read the book. And so the Rwandans had their eyes on those riches in the Congo for a whole long time. And that guy gave up. That was one of the reasons too. Che decided he had to leave because the Rwanda guy said, "Well, I can't justify being here any longer. You're getting your ass kicked. The Simbas don't. They're not doing anything but rape, pillage, and plunder. I'm out of here. I'm going back." So everyone just sort of faded away, and here's Che and his guys sitting there with no ammunition, no weapons, no food. It was time to leave. So
wow.
And Castro, yeah, if someone ever can write the story, I think Castro when Che left Congo, I left Cuba, I think Castro was real happy because Che did not want to be working under the Russians, and Russians were essential to keep Cuba afloat. Castro had to have the Russians, and Che was beginning to become a serious irritant. So I think when Che said, "Boss, I'm going to go export the revolution," I think Castro said, "Good man, Che, go get him. I'm behind you." So he did support because as Che said, he tried to get Castro to be more judicious in his support of the rebels because I go through Che for everything. But Che was trying to motivate these guys and he couldn't get them. He just couldn't do it. He thought he was going to ideologically motivate them, which of course is absolute nonsense. And then try to keep them motivated to anything from what they were used to, although rape, pillage, and plunder was perfectly intense, which he was not up to.
Wow.
So,
what sidearm are you carrying over there? Do you remember what you carried? I know you have your Tudor watch, which apparently the agency is handing out like candy. But what are you carrying over there, weapons wise?
I really like the Browning. I could, I'm not a great shot, but I could hit what I shot. I shot with those mercenaries only a couple of times because I had to maintain this posture. Remember, I was not in their chain of command, but they had to take orders from me. I didn't pay them, and they were mercenaries, but they had to respond to me. So the deal I made with Cassidy when I brought him over and said, "Okay, I run the operations, you run the men," because he had been their regimental sergeant major anyway. You run the men. So all I had to do is look after the operations, and I had to somehow run Cassidy. Okay. Other than that, I stayed away from them. I didn't drink with them. I didn't do anything with them. I stayed aloof, friendly, but aloof. And I tried to carry about me this aura as I'm the U.S. government. So don't diddle with me.
Yeah.
They didn't realize how far away that protection was. But so a lot of bluff, hell of a lot of bluff. So I shot with them a couple of times. And fortunately, I hit what I was shooting at, so they knew I could do that. I drank with them one time. They were so busy drinking, they didn't see that I really wasn't drinking very much. Never drank with them again. Never. Not one time. Never. That was just, when you're a bunch of mercenaries that run the spectrum of low intelligence to brutal psychopath with booze, with weapons. Why would you do that? Why would you go drink with them?
Yeah. I guess maybe for the stories. I mean, so how long do you stay in the Congo, and when do you leave?
I was there probably 9 or 10 months.
Were you ready to leave when the time came, or did you want to stay?
Well, the job was pretty well done.
Yeah.
I was ready to leave. Yeah, I was tired of it. I mean, look, I'm living in the what most people would call a modest hotel, alone. I didn't have any friends. Couldn't have any friends. Once the Cubans were gone, I didn't have any friends, and I sure as hell didn't have anybody looking at my back, protecting my back.
Yeah.
It was it's an environment of violence. So yeah, I was ready to go. I mean, the job was done. There was nothing left for me to do. I didn't want to sit around there if we weren't intensively involved in what we were there to do.
Yeah. And so you had a busy couple of years there. 1964, Gulf of Tonkin incident, and now you're in the Congo on essentially a classified mission there. And what do you do next? How do you move on from that? And what do you do next?
They convinced me to go into the career training program. So I went through the career training program, which was absolutely fascinating. It was a great program. Very supporting. And then when it came time to graduate, I got my choice of what I wanted to do. And I said, well, look, I'd rather be a pimp of a two-bit whorehouse than a State Department officer. So I'm not sure what I can do. I said, well, you got to be a non-official cover. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, well, you're going to be all alone. And I said, oh, sounds great.
Used to it. Yeah, I'm used to it.
So I went non-official cover, and that's all I'm going to talk about that. Because I promise not to talk about that. It's one thing to talk when you're a contractor. I did my little thing, but when you're a NOC, as far as I know, you promise not to talk about it. So,
how long did you stay in the agency?
5 years.
And then did I read you spent 25 years?
I liked the agency. I didn't have any complaints. I was well taken care of. One of the two highest paid guys for my age in the clandestine service. I had no complaints. I liked the people I worked with. I believed in the mission, whatever. But I didn't want to be the number 3 guy in a trading company for the rest of my career. That was too ambitious. Okay. So I said, this is crazy. And so I fired off an application to Harvard Business School. And being the only guy who applied to Harvard Business School that year, the only white guy from Indonesia, I got accepted. And so I was so surprised because if I didn't go there at the time, I thought that was the right place to go. If I didn't go, I was just going to stay in the agency because I said I was happy. My family was happy. We were much older. I wrote him. I said, whoa, I can't leave this fast because I couldn't just walk away. I had to turn over by this time I developed a really good cover. They gave me a cover that was illegal in the country where I went to. That's how I got interested in business as well. They gave me a cover that was illegal in the country that I went to. So I had to create a business to give myself a legitimate cover. And the business did okay. I thought, well, this is fun. And if I could do both, that's even better. But I don't know enough to be able to do both. I can get along in a third world country where hustle and a new idea will take you a long way. Well, I'm going to go other places, so I got to know something. So I fired off an application for Harvard Business School, and fired an application to Harvard Business School, and so I delayed that for a year so I can give these guys a proper turnover. And then I went, and then they were going to make an experiment. And then they said, well, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, I explained it to them, just like I said to you right here. And they said, well, how about if we pay your way? And I said, no, thanks. I don't want any obligations. I said, I'm going to play this out. They were going to make me an experiment and see where it went. And I said, no, thanks. I don't want any obligations. You guys got my, you guys have got my devotion, my loyalty. So let's just play it out. And then that was a period where they had to lay off RIF. I think it was called RIF. They had to RIF like 400 guys. And the guy who was going to make me the experience, this guy who went on to be George H.W. Bush's chief of staff or something, very little senior guy. And he was a Navy. And the guy who replaced him was a really good guy, and he called me down, and I was, and I was getting ready to start my second year of business school. And he said, and I'd done something for him that summer in Tokyo, because I wanted to stay connected to Asia, and I found this opportunity in Tokyo for the summer, so I went there. And he said, "Hey, can you help us do such and such?" And I said, "Sure." I did that. Anyway, so he called me down and said, "Look, Jim, I just had to fire 400 guys." He said, I'm not into conducting experiments." He said, "Please, you're welcome to stay, but you got to make a decision. You didn't stay on a signal." Geez, I only got a few months to go before I graduate. I guess I'm out. Besides, I used my retirement pay for tuition. So that was it. That was it.
Wow. Did I read you spent 25 years in Southeast Asia?
Well, actually, closer to 40.
40. Oh my gosh. And running businesses? What are you doing there?
Well, I started out there. This developer. I know if you remember the name Trammell Crow. But Trammell Crow in those days was the largest real estate developer in the United States, in Dallas. And he had a partner in Atlanta, a couple of partners in Atlanta, one for suburban stuff and one for downtown stuff. And one of his suburban partners was a guy named Mule Pope, who was just an incredible individual. And he loved Asia. And he went to Hong Kong. And this is right, it's still this is still the Cultural Revolution is still going on. Hong Kong people in Hong Kong were looking for the exit because they were afraid that what was going to happen then is what has happened subsequently.
Right.
So the government was having an auction for property, trying to get some things going, and Polk went there for the auction. He said he loved Asia. He went there for that auction, and Polk was one of these guys that's very curious. So was Tran. They were always trying to understand this. What about this? What about this? It's what made them, one of the things that made them so successful. They were so curious, and they learned things, and they said, well, this will work here, this will work over there. And Polk went to this auction. And do you know Hong Kong?
No, I've never been.
Do you know? Okay. Well, right at the most, you probably may have heard of the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong, which is...
I've done my research, yes.
Right across the street was this site that the government was putting up for sale, literally across the street from the Peninsula. And it was 10 years, no interest. Nobody else at that auction understood net present value, which you know, I got 10 years to pay at no interest. The price is not X, it's X minus whatever. Well, those big hongs like Jardine and all those guys, they didn't know what that present value was. So they thought it was, go 10 years. Well, so Pope bid what they thought was the highest price per square foot in the world, which was actually in steel. Because he had 10 years to pay it. He had no interest.
Not bad.
So here's this guy from Georgia with his two-tone shoes, and you can imagine that with these old Brits. Oh, God, it was talking about a culture clash. Anyway, so he had that site, and with a handshake, he got the oldest British construction company in Hong Kong to start construction. And in order to make the numbers work, he had to go deeper than anyone else had ever gone in Hong Kong. So he started a lot, and he didn't have it financed. He just got going. So I had met him through a whole different funny story. And so I get a call. And I'm getting out. I'm graduating from business school, and I'm having stomach seizures. And my wife said, "Well, you better go to see the doctor." Well, I went to see the doctor. And the doctor said, "There's nothing wrong with you. What's the problem?" I said, "Doc, I think the problem is my starting season up because I think I'm going to have to get a real job. Right at that time, God got involved again. And Pope calls me. He said, hey, I'd like to talk to you. So he comes up to Boston and walks out and said, this is what I'm going to do. And he said, how would you like to go out and run the project? And we talked and talked and talked. And he said, well, think about it. So he goes back to Atlanta. And he sort of gives me a call and said, come on down, bring your wife, and let's have another talk. So go down. And he said, well, I wanted you to go to Hong Kong, but I could see you'd rather do something on your own. So let's just stay in touch. And he said, yeah, you probably won't go out because I'll certainly want to do something on my own. So I leave. A week later, the phone rings. Hey, come on back down to Atlanta. So we go to Atlanta. He said, okay, this is what I want you to go to Hong Kong, be in charge of the development of the Sheraton. It's Sheraton Hong Kong. By this time, it's the first Sheraton in Asia, on top of a 200,000 square foot shopping mall with the first bubble elevators in Asia. Well, big deal. Particularly, it's still in the tail end of the Cultural Revolution. So nobody's doing anything. Everybody's scared to do anything. Here comes these crazy Americans. And just an anecdote that many years later, the gambling king of Macau, that name is in Stanley Hill had something going on in Indonesia, and I was asked to go to Stanley Hill to see what they got with this problem in Indonesia. And I went to his fabulous house there, and you should go across from into Florida Bay, etc. And he said, before we start talking, I'm going to tell you, those of us who made a fortune in real estate owe you guys a big debt of thanks, because that Sheraton project is the single most significant event that turned around the psychology of Hong Kong after the Cultural Revolution.
Wow.
Now, this is a guy who's an amazing man. He had the monopoly on gambling in Macau, which he was dealing with the Chinese, he was dealing with the triads, he was dealing, for him to be that gracious was really quite something.
Wow.
Anyway, so the Sheraton was significant. It was a big deal in Hong Kong at the time. And so he said, look, I want you to go to Hong Kong, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll tell you what, you go to Hong Kong and do this project, I'll back you in anything you want to do. They're on. And he paid me low wages. I mean, I probably was the lowest paid guy out of my class in Harvard Business School spring, because I had this thing, and it was a handshake. So I went out, and Pope took me out. He was kind of like Dick Johnson. He took me out to Hong Kong. And he said, hey, everybody, this is Jim. And when he went to Hong Kong, because of the auction and everything, Day Wong arrives. Day Wong means land king. Or would be the headline in the South China Morning Post. Day Wong arrives. So Pope takes me out and says, it's Jim Hawes who speaks for me, and he gets on the plane. So I'd had 2 weeks in real estate experience, 1 week in Atlanta and 1 week at Tramel's office in Gulf. So I had to go about figuring it out, which we did. And again, the market in real estate, the market always makes you look better or worse than you really are. And we hit that market. The Cultural Revolution ended. Hong Kong was just such a dynamic, all those Chinese entrepreneurs. So it took off. So I ended up looking better than I was. And the project was a great success, became immediately the most profitable Sheraton in the whole system, because Pope didn't understand. Pope thought it was going to be a tourist type hotel, and it turned out to be a business hotel, and they always pay more.
Wow.
And the business was all in Northern Territories and Kowloon and so forth, where the typical Westerners didn't travel.
Yeah.
So we got it going, got the shopping mall fully leased at the highest rents per square foot in the world, and everything was great. As I said, it looked a lot better than it was just in the market. And so then I called him and I said, okay, I'm ready to do my own project. He said, oh, silence from that. I said, okay, let me know. So instead of having enough sense to stay in Hong Kong, where I'd just been in charge of the most glamorous project in Hong Kong, I went back to Indonesia. But that turned out okay. So,
wow. Well, I'm sensing a pattern in that you are figuring things out as you go. Baptism by fire from Vietnam to the Congo to what you did as a knock to by its very nature, and then into Hong Kong. Seems like operating alone and unafraid is a pattern for you.
That's been my pattern, but I certainly have not encouraged any of my children to follow that pattern.
Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, there's, as I said, my mother and dad's, really instilled in me, you can do anything you want to do. And that was a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Because I believed it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And what are you doing in Africa now?
Well, we're here to help provide self-reliance and social stability. And, that starts with things like security, police reform, job training, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow. How long have you been there this time?
I have been at this, and I think it's about to come to conclusion. Successful conclusion, 4 years.
4 years, okay.
And by the way, I didn't walk in to solicit. I was invited. And it still takes that long, but that's West Africa. That's just Western Central Africa. That's just the pace. That's the culture.
Wow.
And yeah, once you get the trust relationship established, then things can happen. It takes a while, as you know. You can't do that remotely. You got to be eyeball to eyeball consistently. And there's only one way to do that.
Yeah.
Most people didn't.
Well, as we wrap up here, what advice do you give to, let's say, someone who wants to join the SEAL teams or the military in general or the CIA or wants to go to Harvard Business School or business school in general or start a business? What do you pass on to them?
You got to believe in yourself. You got to have a plan, but flexible. You know better as well as I do. When you get knocked down, get back up.
Oh yes.
If you get rejected, go back at it. You just gotta persist. Get a good network. Build trust relationships. You just can't know all the things you need to know about all the things you need to know about. You got to have trust relationships. You got to have people you can say, "Hey, I need some help," and they'll help because they want to.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you for writing this and capturing this. And it must have been amazing to go back through those logs that you kept for all those years and go back through those logs from the Congo. You talk about that in the book, and I hope everyone adds it to their library. But I
got to ask Rick if he wants those logs at the museum, or I don't know quite what to do with them.
Yeah, don't throw them out.
Yeah.
And don't let them go the way of those Tudor watches that you've lost along the way. A trail of Tudor watches across the globe. But I want to thank you so much for spending some time today, for writing this book, for sharing these lessons. It's just an amazing, the things that you did in Vietnam and the Congo in particular are just incredible, and appreciate your service to the country and for capturing these lessons for future generations. So much appreciated.
Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing absolutely great. I said you're really enhancing the brand.
Well,
don't do enough of that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm going right back to writing after this. A lot of projects on the horizon, but take care over there. Stay safe, and hopefully we can link up in person one of these days.
Thank you. I hope that's so. Yeah, I like that.
Sounds great. Take
Bye-bye.
care. This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by
Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 best-selling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.